President Trump just took the oath of office, and he is promising to drain the swamp. That's the gist of what he's doing. He's going to clean up Washington, and he's doing all sorts of things to attempt that. He's able to fix foreign policy because the president has all sorts of unilateral power to do that. But he's going to find that there is one thing standing in his way. He's not going to be able to do a thing about any of the real swamp in Washington, because the senators have adopted a rule completely unconstitutional, as I will explain to you in part, and it's called the filibuster rule. And the filibuster rule, it's been around for 200 years. When you know the history of it, you'll realize just what an abomination it is and how it violates the Constitution. And what it does is it requires 60 senators, 60, not 51, which would be a simple majority, but a supermajority in order for the Senate to pass practically anything. And we know it's unconstitutional because there are things in the Constitution which specifically require the Senate to pass things by supermajority, things like overriding a presidential veto. But normal legislation, and most importantly, repealing all legislation and repealing all federal regulations passed by these administrative agencies, is supposed to only pass, the only thing that's necessary is a majority vote, not a supermajority. And we know that's what the founders wanted. I'll read you what they had to say about this. The Constitution itself gives the vice president a vote, but only if there's an equal vote on each side. So it's clear that he gets to pass the deciding vote because that would achieve a majority. And he doesn't get any vote unless the votes are equal. The text is very clear. In addition, there's a principle of the unwritten Constitution left over from Britain. It was adopted in parts in writing. There was a document that the King William had to sign in 1689 in the Glorious Revolution. But there's also, anyway, it was incorporated by reference into the United States Constitution by virtue of the Declaration of Independence, which is part of our Constitution by virtue of the 14th Amendment, as the Supreme Court acknowledged in a 1996 case, Winstart. Anyway, what the unwritten Constitution requires is that never can past legislatures control the present legislature. It's called the dead hand of the past. And in order to repeal anything, all that should be necessary is a majority vote. The Senate has created the filibuster so that once under previous, as it's been now for 200 years, whenever the president and 60 senators get together and pass terrible legislation, which they've done multiple times, and creating these administrative agencies, which then go on to create regulations, it gets written in concrete because of the filibuster rule. It is the one thing that prevents any repeal of anything. And it also makes it a nightmare for the president to get his budgets passed, tax bills passed. And the reason for that is they have to make corrupt deals with the losers, with the minority, because they have to get 60 votes. And the history of it is it was put there. Aaron Burr, the second great traitor after Benedict Arnold. Aaron Burr was a traitor. He had been vice president of the United States, and he tricked the Senate into adopting the filibuster rule. I won't even tell you how. It was very clever. He was very crafty. He knew exactly what he was doing. He pretended it was just some minor technical rule change. It was anything but that. And they knew all about what a problem having supermajorities is, because under the Articles of Confederation, which they had during the Revolution, there were supermajority requirements for various things, and it was an absolute nightmare. It was a disaster, and that's precisely why in the Constitution it requires majority rule for virtually everything. They specify in the Constitution the only things that are supposed to be passed by supermajority rule. They wouldn't have put those in there if anything, didn't have to pass by majority rule otherwise. They knew how to make things pass by supermajorities when they wanted to. They put them in the Constitution, and everything else is supposed to be majority rule. The filibuster prevents that. It requires a supermajority. Anyway, Aaron Burr tricked the Senate into adopting it while he was in the middle, and as an intrinsic part of his plot, which he had with several European countries and Mexico, to steal the entire Louisiana Purchase from the United States. He got the commander of the military at the time, General Wilkinson, was involved in the plot, and it was going to make Aaron Burr king. They were going to take half the country. The only reason he wasn't convicted was because under the Constitution, the common law definition of treason is changed. It requires 2 witnesses, and they couldn't get 2 witnesses. That's the only reason he wasn't convicted. But we know he was involved in this, and tricking the Senate into passing this filibuster rule was an intrinsic part of this, because he knew it would hobble the Senate in dealing with the sedition that he was creating. And that's exactly what it had been doing during the Articles of Confederation. It hobbled our country. It made it difficult to fight the revolution. Thank God the French came to our rescue. Anyway, I'm going to read you what Alexander Hamilton had to say about this. So we know exactly what the founders wanted, and they knew all about what a supermajority requirement is. These are the words of Alexander Hamilton from the Federalist 22. Quote, the fundamental maxim of Republican government requires that the sense of the majority should prevail. What requiring a supermajority at first sight may seem a remedy is in reality a poison. To give a minority a negative upon the majority, which is always the case, again, I'm reading his words, always the case where more than a majority is requisite to a decision, is in its tendency to subject the sense of the greater number to that of the lesser. I could go on. He wrote numerous, in the Federalist 22, he goes on talking about how it requires this crazy deal-making with the minority, and there were multiple other Federalist papers he wrote, 75, 58, and Madison wrote too, 54 and 62, and 10. And all of those, the founders were very clear that there was never supposed to be a supermajority, and until that gets fixed, the dead hand of the past is ruling as it's not supposed to under the unwritten Constitution, and the Senate is violating everything, and President Trump will not be able to get rid of the swamp because they can't repeal any of that stuff. And it's one thing to pass stuff, but getting rid of it is the most important part for draining the swamp.